Hi, I'm Aldo. Welcome to Plays the Thing, the channel where I share my experiences prepping and playing tabletop role playing games. This is the first in my series where I play ShadowDark with my regular gaming crew. And ShadowDark, of course, is the dark fantasy role playing game written by Chelsea Dion and published through her company, Arcane Library. So before we dive into the playing of Shadowdark, let me share a little bit of information. First, you'll note that I haven't posted a video in a few weeks, and that's simply because I was traveling for the holidays and then I was traveling for work. So I just simply wasn't available. Secondly, you'll notice that I am pivoting away from Champions now. For those of you who are interested in that game, please don't fret. This is not a permanent pivot. It's just that the crew that plays that game is not going to be able to gather again until probably January. We were hoping for December 3rd game, but that fell through. So it looks like sometime in January will be our fourth session of that game. And as soon as we run it, I will post a session report. So that's coming back. Um, Third, this game is going to be a little bit different from the Champions Now game in that this is the whole gaming group. The Champions Now group is a subset of our regular Saturday game, and we steal away on a Sunday to play that game every once in a while. But this is our weekly game, and therefore it's going to be more players and therefore more characters. So that'll be a little different. And also, you're going to find that there's kind of a rotating cast because life being what it is for our weekly games, not everybody can make it all the time. So it'll be a little bit more haphazard in that way. Which I think is common for a lot of gaming groups, right? All right, so now let's start turning back to Shadow Dark here and talk about maybe why we're doing it before I talk about how we're doing it. And the why has to do a lot with the fact that I'm the primary game master for our group, have been for about 5 years, maybe a little bit more now. That wasn't always the case. We've been playing for decades, and there were others who were filling that role before. But again, for the last 6, 7 years or so, maybe I've been the primary game master. And I found myself kind of in a jam. I was having a hard time recently in the last few months or so, maybe the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 months, finding something that I could run consistently for our group. And the difficulties had to do with a lot of issues. Folks cycling in and out due to illness, people becoming busy at work, including myself. I found it very difficult to focus my attention on a game, especially when I was focusing so much attention on Champions Now and getting that game going. I found that I had only so much that I could dedicate to prep for my regular Saturday game. Um, but normally that wouldn't have really been an issue because you'd find a game that had momentum that would carry me through, so I could have juggled both. But when all the other things hit, I was just finding it difficult to dedicate enough energy to jumpstart something else that would carry us through week after week after week. And so what I felt I needed was something that first most of the group or all of the group would be willing and interested in playing. And for us as a gaming group, I think like also for a lot of groups, the idiom that seems to be the common denominator here is fantasy, some sort of fantasy game. Um and then I needed something that was relatively rules light so that I can prep it very, very quickly. And that people could generate characters very, very quickly if they decided to play at the last minute or whatever else. And then I wanted something that would have sort of a pre-made situation for my player to engage in, right? Like I don't want, I'm not interested in plot point or story games that kind of give me uh uh a kind of like uh, a list of encounters that I'm going through to get to the big bad at the end. I wanted something that's a little bit more emergent, a little something that's a little bit more of a situation that I could throw characters into to see what happens, right? And let things evolve on their own. But I also wanted something that was relatively small and finite because I wasn't sure if this would stick. Um, so I wanted kind of a small sandbox, if that's even the appropriate term these days. I don't know. Sandbox is a term that's maybe a little bit overused, but I wanted something that would give a diverse kind of set of situations of play, kind of an open world, but not something that was so expansive um, that we'd feel like we'd have to commit beyond what we were willing to commit. And ShadowDark just picked all of those boxes for me. So what I ended up deciding to do was to run this, right, which is Curse Scroll number one. It presents you with a setting. All of Kelsey's Curse Scrolls, there are three of them now, present you with kind of a mini setting. And this was perfect because in Curse Scroll number one, we get the setting called the Gloaming, and I'll read you the just the intro. An ancient forest where black trees tower over mossy standing stones and mist-addled bogs. Here, fragile bastions of mankind cluster behind torchlit palisades and pray for deliverance from the demons that hatch from the forest's cursed marrow trees. The Knights of St. Idris range out of their deepwood conclave to wage a losing war against these demons and their servants. The Knights' leader, Inquisitor Justinia Morven, suspects a traitor in their ranks. So, I shared that um, little bit of setting description with the players, and then I added what I had going on in my mind as kind of like an aesthetic um, touch. And then I said that basically I imagine this campaign as if it were kind of a Hammer movie, right? A 1960s 70s Hammer Studios kind of horror flick with that kind of film quality and that kind of aesthetic. I I I I said, normally when we're playing these games, we think of like fairy forest. This is a forest that is actually inhabited by demons, and people are going to be fighting against that demonic and infernal presence in the setting. Um, and one of the things that I also really appreciated about this, and by the way, I this is a pretty basic setup, right? I'm not in reading that. I don't, there are many points of light campaigns that we could run, but what I like about this little source book is that in it we get a relatively small area that's a hex crawl, right? So we have a hex map there. Um, we have a main kind of adventure site, but it's not prominently featured in the way that it's kind of laid out. It's just there. So if the players land on it, there's some, detailed rooms to explore and that sort of thing. But in this mini hex crawl, there are each one of these kind of numbered hexes with locations on there present just little tidbits of information that can, generate um, story by virtue of the players kind of um, encountering them, right? And then there are only two human settlements that are shown on this map. One of them is Warden Wood, which is a town of sort of like hunters, trappers, and lumberers. And then there's Marin's Hold, which is a fishing village. And then there are, again, all these little situations sprinkled throughout that are too, I don't want to detail any of them now. First of all, because there's too many of them for me to do that. And secondly, because, if my players watch this, I don't want them to know what those situations are. They're just there. And, this is the type of thing where I personally, right now in my professional life, given my professional and familial obligations, don't have the time to generate something like this on my own. So I really appreciate the work that Kelsey did in terms of providing me with this little playground to set my game in. So the next thing I did after that is have the players make characters, and I'm about So, what I'd like to do now is transition over to my Foundry so we can talk about the characters that were created. And if you look here on this screen now, what you're seeing is the modified version of the map that I held up a moment ago when I showed you the actual publication. I created a version of that where I blocked out all of the, I camouflaged all of the locations on the map except for the two human settlements and the one orc settlement. We have a character who's a half orc, as you'll see in a moment. And so these are the only settlements that are really known to the members of the group, with one exception, which I'll mention in a moment. Okay. So, all right. So why don't we just go through the characters? First things first, there was some measure of hesitance jumping into ShadowDark, I think for my crew because they they're like, oh gosh, another kind of retro clone, which it's not. ShadowDark is not a retro clone, but a lot of them see it as like, kind of an OSR retro clone that just has the basics. Like you only get to make a fighter or a priest or a thief or a wizard, and you only get human and halfling and elf and dwarf and half orc, and then they throw goblins in, right, as another kind of ancestry that you can make. And they're just like, like, okay, that goblin's kind of cool because we don't normally get to make those. But again, bleh, And I try to tell them, like, look, when you combine those four options with all the backgrounds, you can actually flavor these to be pretty, you know, pretty um pretty distinct from one another. And you never know what you're going to roll in terms of talents, which provides another level of differentiation. And not only that, but Kelsey created a ranger and a bard class that an option as well. And they're like, yeah, yeah, yeah. But one of the nice things about all the cursed scrolls is they come with additional classes. And so in this one we get the witch, the warlock, and the knight of Saint Idris, right? Excuse me. so that that provided a little bit more buy-in for this particular game. And so the first four people that made characters for this game were my wife Lauren, who's also one of the Champions Now players, my friend Mario, my friend Dan, who's also one of the Champions Now players, and who was the other one who made oh, and my friend Andrew, who's not one of the Champions Now players, but Lauren and Dan are, and all four of these guys made um some of the new classes, right? So we ended up, let's just take them one by one. My friend Mario made Asher, who I'm going to click on here. He's the top tile. If you guys, can you guys see? I guess you guys can't. I'm going to ping on him. Let me see if pinging him. Okay, if you'll note, I think, yeah, you can see me pinging now on the screen there. And I'm going to go ahead and open his character sheet. There's his character sheet. Okay. So my friend Mario made Asher. Asher is a warlock. And if we go to the background tab here, the interesting thing about him in terms of his background is that his background is sacrifice. He was basically raised by a coven of witches so that when he got to a certain age, he was going to be sacrificed by the witches. And his very quick, like 2 sentence backstory essentially is that he escaped that, burned the coven to the ground somehow, managed to kill all of his would be sacrificers, and then fled, right? Left. And he was able to do that in part because of the pact that he has with and I forget the entity that he made a pact with. Um oh goodness. It's not Shun the Vile. Shun the Vile is his deity, but I forget who the I should know that. I will find out. I will find out. I'm not seeing it here. Notes. No. Anyway, I'll talk to Mario again to remember who that is. But that was his situation. And And I told them, by the way, something that I should mention before I tell you that they started making characters. I told them that they would begin in the town of Warden Wood, which I'm going to ping right now on the map. So I told them they would begin in the town of Warden Wood. Warden Wood is again, it's kind of like a lumbering community as well as like hunters and trappers, right? And so he said that after fleeing that situation, he ended up in Warden Wood, where he basically hires himself out or contributes, I should say, to the community by basically going out with the hunters or with the lumberjacks and like protecting them. You know, he's again, this is a part of a region that has trees that give birth to demons, right? It's a place where it's pretty nasty out there, but these people have to make a living. So he provides just muscle and support and protection, bodyguard kind of for people who are going out doing their daily jobs. But he's very reticent and very kind of unassuming and kind of withdrawn given his background, which explains his four charisma. He is you know, that is Asher. My friend Dan was actually the first person to make a character. Dan plays Justicar in Champions now, but in this game he made Brother Bernard, and again he chose one of the new classes. He made a Knight of Saint Idris, right? Which basically the Knights of Saint Idris, what they are is that they have made there was an order of basically paladins, right, that kind of protected this region, but they knew that they were not going to be able to defeat the demonic forces that have that are coming from the very ground, for the very forest. So what they did is that they basically have channeled infernal forces into themselves, and their motto is kind of, we will use the demonic forces to fight the demonic forces, but we have to make sure that we don't fall, right? That we don't fall to their power. And so they're interesting because they're kind of like, you know, I don't want to say they're anti-paladins. It has a lot of weird connotations when you think about old school D&D, but they are kind of paladins that really tread a line, and it's very, you know, it's they're kind of scary, and people, they're only kind of an urban legend here, right? Like people whisper about them, they're afraid of them, but they're also kind of hopeful because the Knights of Saint Idris will like protect communities, but then they're also kind of terrifying, right? And Dan, as a Knight of Saint Idris, Brother Bernard would know, or Sir Bernard, or Brother Bernard, I guess, would know also where the hidden their hidden base of operations is on the map, but I didn't put it on the map because nobody else knows that. So, but again, we have a warlock, we have a Knight of Saint Idris, and then Lauren made this character, which I'm going to ping here at the bottom, right? And that is Rowena Oakborn, I think her name is. Let me open the sheet to make sure. Though she didn't put the surname there. I think it's Rowena Oakborn or Creeborn, right? And her story ends up being that she was she's a witch. So again, one of the new classes. And she was found in the hollow of a tree in the forest as an infant and taken in by by two men who are partners and raised her as their own. And I think they've since passed away. I have to get clarity with Lauren from that. I think they're kind of out of the picture, or at least one of them is. But she was raised in the community, and she has a natural connection, a natural affinity um, with the parts of the forest that have not fallen into, you know, the few standing trees that have resisted the demonic infestation, right? So he has this kind of innate connection to the part of the forest that is not yet evil, which is a remnant, really. Um, and Lauren, decided that she would be the kind of living in Wardenwood, had been raised in Wardenwood, and that she kind of served as Wardenwood's healer. And this is going to be important for my prep, the fact that Lauren chose that for her character. Okay, so so a witch a knight of Saint Idris, and a warlock. So when I got together with my friend Andrew to make his character, who I'm going to ping here, this character's name is Crafe. Let me open it to get his full name. Crafe Haluric. And Crafe is, guess what? He is also a warlock. So everybody's picking the new classes, right? Because again, they're looking for something new and interesting to play. Um, and so he is not from the region, right? He is from outside of the region. Um, but his mother was from the region and she disappeared and he doesn't know anything about her. Um, I think the suspicion is that she might have been a witch. He's not sure, but he basically has come down from the northern realms to find out more about his mother. And he has been in Warden Wood for a few months, and he also serves as kind of muscle, but not so much for the people um live in Warden Wood, right? Like Asher does. Asher kind of goes out with the lumbers and the hunters. What Crafe does is that he um uh takes caravans back and forth from Marin's Hold. You know, any merchants that come from the north and trade in Wardenwood and want to move on to Marin's Hold, he will travel with them to Marin's Hold and protect them against the worst that the forest has to offer. So that's how he's been kind of contributing to the community. And then we come to the last two folks who made characters for the first night of play, and that's my friend Mike, who's also one of our champions now players. But this time he made Ursula, who is a half orc fighter. Mike doesn't normally make fighters, but when he makes a fighter, he makes a good fighter. And she is a half orc from the orc community to the south. We're not sure why she left that community, but she did for whatever reason. And we said that, you know, the way that she ended up at Wardenwood was that Wardenwood was being attacked by demons. You know, people were running into the palisade. We mentioned at that point that in this you know kind of backstory, Bernard was had been passing through and was helping to defend the community. And Ursula came running out of the forest, chased by demons. Um, and looking for you know for shelter, but not without giving as good as she got. So she ended up kind of back to back with Bernard, fighting off demons as they backed into the palisade and then defended the community. Right. So from the get go, she was seen as an asset simply because she's a fierce warrior. Again, not the most charismatic. I think she's got a 3 charisma. Is that right? Yeah. People rolled not so good, but she has a 3 charisma. So she you know she's despite her lack of social graces, um you know she's a valued member of the community, if for no other reason that you know a good axe hand is gonna help to protect the community. And then my friend Jason made Renwick, who is a wizard from the north who came south to get a better handle on the rot, the infernal rot that is down in this region. And seems we've established because of Crafe and because of Renwick, we've established that rot is creeping northward, so that the northern realms have been sending scouts and folks to kind of try to get a sense of what is happening to the south. And Renwick, we said, had come down a couple of years ago, has built himself a treehouse in within the palisade of Wardenwood, and he's kind of an eccentric scholar who, you know, um, promises to bring the you know his intelligence to bear on whatever you know whatever dangers Warden would face. So it was kind of nice because I didn't make this a requirement of, of character generation. I simply said, look, this is the region we're going to be in. This is the situation that we're in, and we're going to start in Wardenwood, and this is the type of place that Wardenwood is. And most of the players made characters who had ties to Warden Wood or who had good reasons for being contributing members to Warden Wood's community, right? So that was really important and interesting for me, and it also presented me with a little bit of a problem. Not a bad problem. This is a good problem to have. But if you go into Cursed Scroll, and you read the section on Wardenwood, Wardenwood is tied into a series of situations that surround it, right? And one of those situations had to do with a healer who's not really a healer, but is kind of a poisoner, right, of the community. And to me, having Lauren claim the role of healer for the community meant that that situation as written didn't work, right? In order to honor Lauren's choice, in order to honor her place in the community, her character's place in the community, I couldn't then have this kind of overlapping interest that was like, yeah, okay, you're the healer, but there's this other woman who's also the healer, and she's there doing her thing and whatever. There would have been a possibility for kind of like um clashing, the pre-written adventure. It's not really an adventure, the pre-written situation clashing with what the character had introduced to the game. So I did what I think a responsible game master should do, and that is I backed off. And I kept the situation, and I'll say now that it's an old woman by the name of Drusilla who claims to be a healer but is really a malevolent force. I had to kind of readjust what Drusilla was doing because Lauren's character, or I should say Rowena's presence, created a situation that would not be easy for her to assail, just as a matter of fact, by the way that she was pre-written into this supplement. So, that was the primary, right? After receiving all of the information from the players as they were making characters, um, I had to quickly kind of mentally adjust what I was going to be doing with the situations that surrounded Warden Wood. And this is going to be important for our first night of play. But I think I'm going to kind of hold it there. I'm gonna basically take this video to be kind of like an introduction to the setting, kind of like what happened during we didn't have a session zero, but what happened during our quote unquote kind of session zero during our character generation phase. What happened as people were kind of making characters, what that gave me to work with, and then just telling you that I had to then make some adjustments. But although I'm calling it here in terms of this video, and next video I'll go into our first play report. One thing you should know is that our play, our session was right on the heels of this prep, right? So the last person to finish a character finished their character about an hour before we started playing, which meant that I had to kind of be thinking on my feet in terms of how we rolled out that first session of play. So we'll let you know how that goes in the next video. Until then, thank you so much for tuning in. As always, I wish you good health, I wish you good cheer, and I wish you good gaming. Goodbye.